Hello, my name is Susie Ries, and I'm a past president of Friends of Tennessee Libraries. This presentation is part of the Friends of Tennessee Libraries 2021 virtual annual meeting, Navigating the New Normal, the Future of Friends. And we will be talking about the fearless women of the Packhorse Library Project and what we can learn from them. For 29 years, Friends of Tennessee Libraries has been promoting and advocating for libraries and their friends by mentoring and supporting friends groups. We are happy to present this discussion as part of our ongoing efforts. And for more information, please go to friendstnlibraries.org. I'm pleased today to introduce to you our Friends of Tennessee Libraries President-elect, Kathy Dooley-Smith, who is currently the Friends of Brentwood Library. And she is our technology supervisor and facilitator this morning or today. Jason Vance is the faculty librarian, professor, and interim department chair at Middle Tennessee State University's James E. Walker Library. And Jeanne Schmitzer is a historian, attorney, and librarian. She spent most of her career in public libraries and recently retired from the Tennessee State Library's regional library system. All are both librarians who have been fascinated and written about East Kentucky Packhorse librarians. Jason, how did you get interested in this topic?
Well, thanks, Susie. And first of all, thank you, Susie, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And Kathy, appreciate it. I'm a big fan of Friends of Tennessee Libraries and a member. And I just want to thank the organization for all your support of libraries and literacy in Tennessee. I'm also excited to be here with Jeanne. Jeanne and I have emailed and talked over the phone for years, but Jeanne, I don't think we've ever had a face-to-face conversation. So it's good to be able to do this, even if it's virtually. So appreciate you all setting this up. So Susie, to your question, how did I get interested in this topic? Before I moved to Tennessee in 2008, which seems like 100 years ago, I was a librarian at Morehead State University in Morehead, Kentucky. And I worked there for 8 years. And Morehead, if you're not familiar with the geography of Kentucky, it is in the eastern part of the state, over in the foothills of the Appalachians. And I was a reference librarian there. And in the main reference room, right on the wall near the reference desk where I worked and spent a lot of time each week, was a framed print that was hanging on the wall. And this print was produced as part of a publisher's promotional series that celebrated America's public libraries. And this particular print was from 2003, and it featured a painting by Joe Davis. And that painting was based on an old archival photo of Packhorse librarians all mounted up in front of the Knott County Packhorse Library in Hindman, Kentucky. So I was sitting there each week, looking at that print, and started talking to some of the librarians who'd been around for a while there in Eastern Kentucky about the program, about the history, and started reading about it. Ran across Jeanne's work, ran across work by some other people who've studied the Packhorse librarians, and just became fascinated by the story. I dug into it and did some research on my own, and have published some articles about the Packhorse librarians as well. And I'd kind of put that away. I'd done that from kind of 2008 to 2014 or so, and I put it away and moved on to other projects. But I've been really excited recently that there's been kind of this renewed interest in the topic, probably sparked by a couple of books. I brought these along because a good librarian doesn't do a presentation without some book recommendations. But so one book is Kim Michelle Richardson's The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek, which is a historical novel that one of the main characters is a Packhorse librarian. And this one I haven't read, but Jojo Moy's The Giver of Stars, another one. It came out around the same time. But both of those are historical novels in which the Packhorse librarians feature pretty prominently. So with all this interest, some book groups have been reading these together and doing some study of those books. And so I've kind of dusted off this research and have had a chance to kind of dig back into it. And it's a lot of fun to talk about.
Great. Will you tell us about the scrapbooks of the Pack Horse Librarians?
Sure. So as I said, I'm not the first person to study this, and Jeanne, is a expert on this topic. Yeah, she's the historian here, and historical research was not really my forte.
Not
so
on the scrapbooks. The scrapbooks were awesome, but I knew nothing about them.
Yeah, so in reading about those and some of the other things that have been written about the Pack Horse Librarians, that was kind of my angle, and so I kind of dug in a little bit on the scrapbooks. So just to kind of set the stage here, the Pack Horse Libraries were pretty lean operations. The WPA money, the federal funding that went to support these libraries really only paid for the librarians' salaries. So there was no money for collections. The collections themselves largely were dependent on donations. And for anybody who's worked in libraries or has worked a public library book sale, a lot of donated books are not always in the best shape, unfortunately. They're well loved, we'll call them that. But so these old magazines, old books, old newspapers were donated, and many of them were just too worn out to use. So the librarians, being thrifty and resourceful, would clip those things up and would repurpose them and take those donations and repurpose them into scrapbooks. And the scrapbooks, they would make them out of notebooks, and pasting things into notebooks. They would even use old window shades or wallpaper as the base for those scrapbooks. And the scrapbooks really looked like they fell into two categories. So one was where they had taken these donated materials, or really any printed ephemera. It could be a birthday card or a holiday card. It could be decorative wallpaper that they've clipped up and taken pictures from, recipes, and they're pasting those into a document. So they're taking existing written content and pasting it into the scrapbook. The other side of it is that they were actually going out into the communities and collecting things from their readers, be it recipes, be it stories, quilt patterns. So they're really collecting these things with new original content that comes from the communities they served. So those were two of the kinds of scrapbooks that became part of those collections.
So the scrapbooks became materials that they shared with their patrons, that the librarians shared with their patrons. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So and the interesting part of that was in my research, I found this, there was a library manual for Pack Horse Libraries. And this was put together by the state supervisor of WPA library projects. His name was Mr. Philip Blodgett. And this is dated 1939, and it's a 46-page manual. So if you're thinking about opening a Pack Horse library, I've got the manual and I can share the PDF with you.
Excellent.
Yeah, but it covers everything from how to process materials to just the day-to-day operations and record keeping of the Pack Horse Libraries. But the reason I mention that is because there is a section in that document, 2 pages or so, that describe how to create these scrapbooks. Not just physically how to create them, but also kind of the why and the how. So in that document, and I'm just going to read a quote from it here. He says that Mr. Blodgett says, "You make these scrapbooks according to demand, always trying to answer the questions most frequently asked. The choice is limited only by demand, estimated use, and the source of material." So he was encouraging people to go out and talk to the people who live in their communities. What do you want to read? And we'll create it. We'll make it. Mm-hmm. And those scrapbooks did become part of the circulating collections. I was looking for numbers when I was doing my research, and I didn't find like a good ending number of how many of these were created. But the last known document that I was able to find was from April 1940. So there are still 3 years of this program left at that point. But even at that point, there were more than 2,500 scrapbooks. So 2,500 original scrapbooks created and circulating throughout the counties of Eastern Kentucky.
Would you say that's an early form of social media?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And do you have any photographs you could show us of those?
I do. I was able to track some of these down, and again, thank you to Jeanne for the clues in her book where they had a few snapshots of these. But yeah, there are only 5 of these that I've been able to find. So 2,500 plus of these. But scrapbooks, aren't created to withstand the test of time. So, but thankfully there are 5 of these that are preserved, and they are in the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library in Hyde Park, New York. So I was able to take a trip up there and view some of these and put hands on them and actually take some photographs. And so if you don't mind, I'll share my screen here for just a second. I could bore you to death with pictures of these. We could spend a whole hour doing this, but I'll just give you the highlights here. All right, so you should see that on your screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we have here on the screen is the 5 scrapbooks are across the bottom of the page, but the 5 scrapbooks are actually collected in a larger scrapbook. So you can say there are 6 scrapbooks. It's a scrapbook of scrapbooks. But this is kind of a sampler, you could say, of the different kinds of scrapbooks that were available. So let me just click through a few of these, and we won't spend much time on any of them, but we'll just kind of give you the highlights. So this is the outside cover. It's a loom woven cover. And inside that scrapbook, there are 5 different scrapbooks pasted in, and they have little introductory notes with them. So the first one is a book of recipes, and these are recipes that are just clipped from magazines and newspapers. Some of them look like labels off of food products themselves. So you'll see some familiar, brand names in here like Heinz and Campbell's Soup and things like that. And they're just kind of pasted in, without much organization or theme or structure. But the really great part was that inside that scrapbook, there were a few pages of typed recipes. And these are the recipes that they collected from the people who lived in the communities. And so you probably can't read this on your screen, but there are recipes here on the screen for baked possum. Yeah, and I can hear Susie's stomach growling now at the prospect of having baked groundhog for dinner, right? That sounds delicious. So some of these are kind of fun like that. And then this is not a scrapbook, but it kind of ties in with the whole idea of the recipes. This is a collection that, while not in a scrapbook, it is a collection of recipes that were collected by the Packhorse Librarians in Whitley County, which is Williamsburg, Kentucky, down near the Tennessee border. And they typed up a list of recipes from their patrons as well. So I have a second recipe for baked possum, as well as baked coon and dried rabbit and so on. I haven't tested these, so I can't vouch for them, but
wow.
So the second scrapbook here, this one we'll go through really quickly. This is again where they've kind of taken different images from different magazines and pasted them in, but it's hilarious. They've done some really great captions, and this one was actually put together by one of the people who lived along the Packhorse route and was given as a gift to the librarian. But it's all celebrating the librarian. So you can see they've clipped ads from magazines. Here's one with a cow in the living room, and the caption says, "Everyone is reading one of Mrs. Marshall's books except the cow. I guess she would if she could read." That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So all these things are just singing the praises of Mrs. Marshall, the Packhorse Librarian, and yeah, this is fantastic.
It's indicative of how they felt.
Yeah, so this is kind of again, kind of going back to your social media analogy. This is people leaving positive comments for their librarian. So the third of the 5 is one that's focused on religion. And so a lot of the church services were held in the homes at the time. And so this one is one that's put together just using pieces of wallpaper. And you can see that it's kind of on the bottom of the page. I'll move my cursor across, but you can see it says unwashable kind of upside down there. And so that is a piece of wallpaper. When I was holding this, it was falling apart in my hands. It's very crumbly and brittle. But they've taken these Bible lesson cards and pasted them into that. And it was very striking just visually. All right, the next one here is quilt patterns. And so this was a mix of quilt patterns that were clipped from magazines and also hand-drawn quilt patterns. Now, these are not ones, if any of you are quilters, these are not patterns where you would go and actually, place this down and make your cuts, but it's more just kind of conceptually, here are some designs. These are just drawn with pencil and colored with what appears to be crayon. But you can see there are some ads clipped in here as well. There's the Dutch girl.
Yeah.
All right, and then the last one is the picture books. And so the picture books were made for what they called the illiterates. And so these were people who didn't read, they just wanted pictures to look at. And this one, they would have different themes. And so this one is nature and animal themed. So there are lots of flowers and various wildlife. And there are all these bird cards. And I noticed these bird cards were throughout the whole scrapbook. And so I looked into those. They were all kind of these nice little prints. And it turns out they had a name, a signature for MC Eaton. And I dug into that a little bit. So it turns out that these cards came free in boxes of Arm & Hammer baking soda.
Oh.
And so again, just any kind of printed ephemera that was at their disposal, they would put them in the scrapbooks just if they were, if they kind of fit with the visual theme.
Yeah.
So that is the quick
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Skip through some of the scrapbooks.
Yeah, that's fascinating. In my introduction of Jeanne, I did not tell you that she is one of the co-authors of a book, Down Cut Shin Creek, with the Packhorse Librarians of Kentucky. Kathy Appelt is the other author. And Jeanne, tell us about how you got interested in this. And I know you wrote a thesis.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, I just wanted to say, Jason, I did not know you were in Moorhead before. And in my research, one of the librarians from Moorhead said, I can help you. I can show some of your employees how to repair books. And she did a whole session with 12 of the Packhorse libraries, showing them how to repair books, and probably gave them some tips on how to do these scrapbooks, I'd say.
Oh.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm really honored to be here with Jason too, because he's done some great research. But how I got interested in this is in the early 90s, I was a librarian at the Orlando Public Library down in Orlando, Florida. And at the time, I was also going to University of Central Florida part-time. I was working on my master's in American history. And my research for my thesis involved a lot of trips to Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. That's where my research was focused. So I was going to Western Kentucky University and the State Archives and the Historical Society. And one day when I was at work in the downtown library up on the second floor, social sciences, I happened to pull a book off the shelf, and it was one of these big old coffee table books with a lot of just really cool pictures in it. And it had been put out by the Library of Congress, and it was on the libraries across America and history and that kind of thing. I flipped through it, and I saw this photo. It's the one that Jason described in Knott County that he saw as a painting, but I saw the photo in this book of these carriers lined up, quite a few of them on mules and horses. That's it, in Knott County. And there's one gentleman there at the very end. And I just thought that was so cool, but all it did was identify it as the Packhorse Library of Eastern Kentucky, during the Depression. So I was about to make a trip up to Kentucky to do some of my thesis research. And I thought, well, if I've got a little extra time, I'll see if they have something. And I had about a half a day left, and I asked the there at the Kentucky State Archives, have you ever heard of this thing? And she said, no, I've never heard of it. And I said, well, you think you might have something on it? And she said, I don't know. Let me talk to one of the other people there. And the next thing I knew, they had rolled me in a cart with about 6 or 7 boxes, archival boxes.
My gosh.
And I started going through it, and I thought, oh my gosh. Well, of course I didn't have enough time to work on it, but I found other, in the future, I continued to go and found more things. They had a lot of great photographs. So that's how I got interested in it, and I got started on it.
And you even interviewed some actual Packhorse librarians, right?
Mm-hmm. One, Kathy Appelt, and I interviewed Grace Lucas in Breathitt County. And she was the only one we got to talk to, the only one that we knew of that was still living. And we did that 98 or 99, maybe somewhere right in there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Could you briefly tell us how you decided to write a book for children about this topic?
Well, it actually found me. Kathy was helping her son in elementary school with a little research project, and he happened to run across some article I'd done online. And so she contacted me, and I was actually working at the Tennessee Tech Library at the time. So she contacted me and wanted to talk to me. And so we talked, and she asked if I would be willing to co-author a children's nonfiction with her, because she had never written nonfiction or a chapter. She did picture books, fabulous picture books. So I did, and she was established. She had an editor and everything with HarperCollins. So, man, I didn't have to do a thing. I just hung onto the coattails and went.
You had already done a lot, and help.
I provided all the research and some edits and things, but she wrote the story based on a day of crisis. The woman.
I'm thinking about the recipes that Jason shared for opossum and groundhog. I think that's indicative of how desperate times were. And I think it is hard for us to imagine how desperate times were. I mean, they couldn't go to the grocery store like we could. And
refrigeration, no electricity, no refrigeration, no electricity, no radio, you can't get the weather report, just so many basic things.
Yeah. And as the name Cut Shin Creek implies, is treacherous for these librarians to travel there by horse and sometimes on foot when the going was tough. And their pay was minimal, and the conditions were terribly hard. The weather was bad a lot, and they rode 18 miles or so.
Around that.
Yeah.
Around that.
A day. And they each had 5,000 to 10,000 patrons, children, women, and men to serve. Is that right?
Yeah, because each of them, a lot of these counties, they would have 4, 5, and 6 routes, and you might only do one route that week. And depending on how many carriers they had, how many might be going as well.
But I understand this was wildly successful, and it sparked a lot of interest in people who had never had library materials before. It sparked interest in their desire to learn to read, and children and adults, and to learn more. So
yes, it sure did.
Such a fabulous project. Jeanne, changing the subject a little bit, can you help us think about what we can learn from the Pack Horse Librarians project?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about that. We still have some issues today, and especially with our rural libraries, we have a lot of poverty today. And we might not live up some Tennessee holler, but a lot of folks can't get to the library. They don't have reliable access to transportation. They can't get there during bankers hours, and our rural libraries tend to have bankers hours. So there's also some gaps in broadband and access to broadband type services. But there's a lot of issues going on here that I think the problem lies within several systems, both within the state government and state library standards together, local government and local library boards as well, because today in 2021, Tennessee rural libraries, we remain quite poorly funded and poorly functioning by a combination of failures in all these systems.
I will say that as a member of the Friends of Tennessee Libraries, I've had the privilege to meet a lot of librarians, and they are without a doubt the most wonderful people that I've ever known, because they are so intent on sharing education and helping people find ways to learn. And the thing that librarians are not good at generally is blowing their own horns and asking for help and attention. And so that, I think, is where the Friends of Tennessee Libraries can help out. And now turn it over to Kathy Dooley Smith, our president-elect.
Well, advocacy is one of my passions, and I think Friends suffer from no one knowing what we do. And, you know, as you were talking about people not understanding the role, not being present for the role, that it's just so important. It's always important to suit up and show up, because you never know what's going to happen. And we tend, as a Friends group at the Friends of Brentwood Library, try to attend all commission meetings that have any library item on the budget, whether it's the approval of a policy manual or a funding request. And we try to hit a few in the middle, because it's really important that you don't just show up with your hand out if you really want to build those relationships. And it also helps that you understand the overall priorities of your funding body, and you can then find a way to fit in to what you see as their vision. I went last night. I go every October and accept a proclamation from the city of Brentwood honoring Friends on the anniversary of our founding. And I do not go without a one sheet of paper that says, here's who we are, here's how many members we have, here's how many hours we volunteered, here's how much money we raised, and here are all the things that we did with that money that the city did not fund. And they love it, because there are very few times that people come to commission meetings with positive news, and the things going on in your library are positive and they're important to the community, and you just need to let people hear that, particularly the people who are your funding body. And Friends of Tennessee Libraries is always happy to help you with that. If you want to reach out, we can give you some individual, customized advice, and we have a whole team of mentors who can help you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Jason. I've learned a lot in getting ready for this, and I'm so grateful to you all for the information you have shared with your work and with us here today. So thank you again for joining us. This presentation has been recorded and will be available on our website at friendstnlibraries.org and on our Facebook page. The Friends of Tennessee Libraries is always available to provide support or mentoring for friends. Please contact us. Thank you for all you do. Happy National Friends of the Library Week.